Has Syria defeated Kurdish self-rule? For much of the past decade, Syria's Kurds appeared to be among the few clear beneficiaries of the country's devastating civil war. Carving out a corner of the country, they built their own institutions and armed forces and secured US backing as they fought against Islamist extremism. Yet today, their autonomy is effectively over. Following a rapid offensive by Syrian government forces, Kurdish territorial self-rule is being dismantled. But while many see this as a necessary step to building a new Syrian state, others believe that it'll lay the foundations for future conflict. So, what exactly has happened, and what could it all mean? Hello and welcome. I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, and security. A key dilemma facing countries emerging from civil war is how to restore political unity without reigniting the tensions that sparked the conflict in the first place. While national governments often see a strong central authority as key to reasserting sovereignty, minority groups tend to see it as a threat to their security. Instead, they want their own autonomy. Finding a balance between these competing demands can be extremely difficult, particularly after years of war. Grant too little self-rule to ethnic and religious communities and grievances can grow, sometimes violently. But grant too much and state unity can steadily erode, leading to long-term fragmentation or even collapse. This is the problem now facing Syria. After more than a decade of civil war, the central state is steadily reasserting control over much of the country. However, while Damascus sees this as a necessary step towards restoring order and ending the country's effective partition, for the Kurds of northern and eastern Syria, the loss of autonomy raises worrying questions about their future, their rights, and their long-term place within the state. The Syrian Arab Republic sits at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. To its north lies Turkey, to the east is Iraq, and to the south is Jordan. Lebanon and Israel are to its southwest. While the country is overwhelmingly Arab, it's also home to many other communities. Of these, the Kurds are the largest ethnic minority. Accounting for roughly 10% of the population, they're concentrated in the north and northeast, along the borders with Turkey and Iraq, which also have their own large Kurdish populations. Although the Kurds have a long history across the region, including in what is now Syria, our story begins immediately after the Second World War. When the modern Syrian state was founded following the end of French colonial rule, it was based on an Arab nationalist identity. As a result, Kurdish identity was often viewed with suspicion, if not hostility. Many Kurds were denied citizenship, the Kurdish language was restricted, cultural expression was tightly controlled, and political rights were heavily suppressed. Things became even more difficult following the rise of the Assad regime in the early 1970s. Both Hafez al-Assad and later his son Bashar al-Assad ruled through a highly centralised system that tolerated little dissent. Kurdish political activism was seen not only as a challenge to the regime's authority, but also as a threat to the Arab nationalist foundations of the country as a whole. And yet, Syria's Kurds were rarely separatists. In truth, their demands tended to focus on cultural rights, citizenship, and local self-governance, rather than independence. Nevertheless, any calls for greater freedoms were firmly rejected, often by force, thereby deepening the alienation between the Kurdish communities and Damascus. In the end, the critical moment came in 2011 when the Arab Spring saw protests erupt across the Middle East, including in Syria. As the widespread demonstrations evolved into an outright civil war, the Assad regime withdrew from parts of the north and northeast to concentrate forces on key cities and core areas in the west of the country. Seizing their opportunity, Kurdish political and military organisations quickly took control of the predominantly Kurdish regions of the country. Over the next few years, they established a de facto autonomous administration based on the principles of democracy, equality, and ethnic pluralism. However, the rise of Islamist groups, most notably Islamic State, marked a turning point, as the United States sought effective and reliable partners to fight the growing threat. It turned to the Kurdish-led forces. This partnership would prove decisive in rolling back extremist control across eastern Syria. All this, in turn, strengthened Kurdish autonomy, which was steadily reinforced by the presence of American troops and wider international support. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing for regular updates on international relations, conflict and security. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. For many Kurds, this period felt like a historic breakthrough. For the first time, they governed themselves openly. They could freely use their own language and exercise real political authority. Nevertheless, it was also an inherently fragile arrangement. Autonomy rested on a combination of Kurdish military strength, the course of the civil war, and external support, particularly from the United States. All the while, it faced strong opposition. Aside from Damascus and parts of the Arab population within the autonomous regions, the Turkish government also fiercely opposed Kurdish autonomy, arguing that the Syrian Kurdish forces were linked to the PKK, which had been waging a long-standing separatist campaign in Turkey. This fragility came to the fore following the overthrow of the Assad regime in December 2024 and the rise of a new Syrian government, as the administration tried to solidify control over much of the country. Focus naturally shifted to the Kurdish autonomous zones. But while the government and Kurdish leaders eventually signed an agreement in March 2025 that would see the Kurds join state institutions, this broke down. The key question was no longer whether Damascus would attempt to reassert authority, but instead a question of when it would and on what terms. And it's against this backdrop that in the first weeks of 2026, the Syrian government has launched an offensive against Kurdish-held areas, pressing deep into territory held by the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, the Kurdish-led militia that controlled much of the region. But at the same time as it sought to end Kurdish territorial autonomy, Damascus offered the Kurds greater political rights. In a landmark decree, President al-Shara granted them full citizenship, formally recognised Kurdish as a national language, and promised broader cultural rights, including the teaching of Kurdish in schools and recognition of cultural holidays. So far, negotiations between the central government and the SDF have produced a temporary ceasefire and what appears to be an outline for Kurdish representation within state institutions. Reports suggest that in return for integrating its fighters into the Syrian armed forces, the SDF will be able to propose candidates for senior posts and participate in the political process. But while these gestures are meant to address long-standing Kurdish grievances, many Kurds see the concessions as far too limited, especially as they have to surrender their de facto autonomy. Then again, their room for manoeuvre is highly limited. Government forces are now poised to seize the last remaining territory by force if they don't accept. Moreover, and much to the anger of many Kurds, the United States has effectively backed the Syrian government's reintegration strategy. So, has Syria defeated Kurdish self-rule? In one sense, the clear answer is yes. Autonomous territorial control will now end and the central government will reassert its power. However, defeat implies total domination. In truth, though, the reality is more complex. Those in favour of reintegration argue that the self-declared autonomy was never sustainable. Aside from political and economic isolation, Turkey had long threatened the autonomous areas. In this sense, they see the latest developments as a positive step The granting of formal legal and language rights at a national level not only suggests recognition that the old model of repression is no longer viable, but that Kurds have a genuine place within the new Syria. If this moment is used to build a genuinely inclusive Syrian state that treats diversity as a strength rather than a challenge, it may mark a turning point for all Syrians. Reintegration could ultimately offer a path towards stabilisation, normal governance, and post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation. But balanced against this, for the Kurds, the lost autonomy is undoubtedly a profound setback. Freedoms won through difficult conflict and institutions built over many years will be lost. More to the point, many will worry whether the new rights will be honoured in practice. Will they have a meaningful voice in the country as a whole, or merely a symbolic recognition? Many Kurds fear that the promises made now will fade once international scrutiny diminishes. If reintegration leads to renewed exclusion, then it will almost certainly lead to further tensions and instability in the future. Although the future of the Kurds within Syria remains to be seen, for now there's another deeply worrying dimension to what's happening. One that poses a separate fundamental threat to the Kurdish people. In seizing Kurdish-held territory, Syrian forces have also taken control of the Al-Hol detention camp, where the SDF has been holding thousands of Islamic State militants. Given that ISIS has been renewing its activities across eastern Syria and western Iraq, if detainees escape, this could have disastrous consequences, not only for the Kurds, but for Syria and the wider region. And it's for all these reasons that the potential effects of what's currently happening in Syria could hardly be more serious. While supporters argue that what we're seeing now will ultimately create a single multi-ethnic Syria, opponents argue that it could do exactly the opposite. Quite apart from the profound effects it'll have on the daily lives of the Kurdish community, it could lay the foundations for many decades of Kurdish resentment at the loss of their hard-earned autonomy. In this sense, removing autonomy may yet make the country safer, more secure, and more united. Equally, though, it may simply undermine stability, deepen divisions, and pave the way for long-term disunity. I hope you found this useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.